What I want to do first is kind of set the scene. What was Lancaster like in the 1700s? It was the first town in Worcester County, established in 1635, and I think those of you who are from Lancaster probably know that. Not everybody knows it was the first county seat in 1731, but Lancaster didn't want to be the county seat. So they stepped down and Worcester became the county seat. Most commercially developed town in the region. And there's a reason for that, and we'll see, I'll show you a map later, and you'll be able to see why that happened. They had more artisans, more shopkeepers, more lawyers that were quite successful, and there were 3 justices of the peace in town. This is in the 1700s. Worcester and Lancaster were the most important centers in this part of the state, in the north central Mass. We had the largest merchandise store in Worcester County, and I'm not sure if it actually was here by 1775, but it would have been shortly after. We were the mother town. We had already split off 3 towns, and Sterling was due to split off during the war. People ask what businesses were going on in town. The ones on this side here, these are what was called mechanics, and every town has them. And that was pretty much what was going on during the 1700s. People were all farmers, and the ones that, even the people that had trades were farmers as well. Some people that I noticed that stood out from the crowd, John Bigelow played violin in the church choir, but he was also a goldsmith and got involved with the Boston Jewelers and became head of the company. The store I mentioned, the largest store in Worcester County, Captain Samuel Ward, and there was another store that was quite popular, owned by Levi Wilder. On the handout, I gave you a link to this map. If you go to that link, you'll be able to touch on any of these numbers, and it'll give you the address. So if you wanted to drive around Lancaster and visit these houses, you can do that by following what you see on the map for that link. It's hard to find census information, and amazingly, somebody found the 1765 census fairly recently. I don't know the exact date, but there were 301 houses in Lancaster in 1765, 328 families, and that suggests that sometimes extended families lived in the same house. I don't know if the population was 1999 people. The rest is not too significant. You can see they refer to Negroes as opposed to African Americans or whatever we call them today. Same thing with Indians. There was one, and I'm interested to find out who that one person is. This shows Worcester County and where the core areas were. And Lancaster and Worcester were the 2 biggest. And an interesting thing that I noticed here, this is Rutland. And it was as big as Lancaster. You know, we had a big land grant, but they did as well. But none of the towns in that area really were strong by this point in time, and they still are not. Worcester's really taken over. And here, so why would Lancaster become the center? If you look here, you can see there's a road that goes straight through Lancaster. That was how you got out to the western part of the state. Now, the western part of the state was actually populated differently because people would go up the Connecticut River and settle along the river. And So that's why we have the patch of area that wasn't really populated very much for a while, that was west of Lancaster. Well, west of Worcester County, I probably should say. So starting in the 1750s, and I'm showing the acts that England passed that affected us. They were basically trying to force us to buy everything from them and to tax everything that we needed most. And when you see the parts in green, that was our response, our actions that were taken. Colonies Unite was proposed, and interestingly enough, England thought that was a great idea because if we united together, it would be easier for them to control us, which wouldn't necessarily be a good thing for us. The Sons of Liberty were formed, and as we go down the line, things started happening. They stopped Boston from being able to import anything that wasn't from England. We have the Boston Massacre, and I don't want to get into that in detail, and also we all know the story, being from Massachusetts, but that was well publicized, so the other provinces all heard about it, just in case they didn't realize we were actually being treated tougher than the other colonies by England, and it was a tougher thing for us. I also have in here the HMS Gaspee, and that was important because the people in Rhode Island looted it. Now, there are laws that regulate looting, and it actually was legal to loot a boat if it was run aground or abandoned or whatever. But England, of course, didn't agree with it because they were looting an English boat. But the key thing here is they wanted to take those people from Rhode Island over to England and put them on trial in England. And that's something that brought attention to people in the colonies that, wait a minute, we should have a trial of our peers, or a jury of our peers. Yeah, so that was an important thing, and I believe it was celebrated last weekend. They have Gaspee Days every year. We started to set up committees to figure out what to do. So we had committees in town who talked over what do we do, how do we want to get involved. But we combined with other towns in Worcester, and from Worcester they picked representatives that went into Boston, and we should be proud. The two representatives that went into Boston were from Lancaster. We come up to the Tea Act, the Boston Tea Party. And as we go down, we don't often talk about the Quartering Act, but soldiers were just marching into people's houses and saying, "Get out, we're taking over your house." Not a good feeling. They were also eavesdropping on conversations in taverns and then trying to arrest people for what they were talking about. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. What do we have down here? The Continental Congress, and we were very involved in that. And we even had continental presidents elected to lead the revolts. Now, when we got together just in town here, we came up with a list of grievances. And in Boston, they liked what we said so much, they published it in the Boston Gazette. It was very popular. If you went to Tori's talk, she talked about that a little bit, a little bit more. I don't have it in detail here, but a lot of familiar things. The right to meet together and discuss any topic. I mean, why should that be a question? And why should England be raising money and then just taking it over to their country? The fact that England was paying the people who worked in the courthouses meant that they were not necessarily being fair. And I'm sure the Native Americans felt that way. So impartial judges is part of the same thing. And of course, the right to trial by jury. And that came up with the Gaspee. An interesting thing, Chief Justice Peter Oliver, the date I found was 1756. That seems quite early. But then another reference showed he was around a little bit later. But that was the first person to be banished from Lancaster. When he left, his estate was confiscated, and they went on to do that with every loyalist that was banished. And there was one exception, we'll get to that later. The blacksmiths they thought the Committee of Correspondence wasn't good enough for them. They wanted to pull together and see what they could do on their own. And since everybody depended on blacksmiths so much, if they withheld services from loyalists, that was going to have an effect. And that's what they did. The town of Lancaster voted to form 2 groups of 50-minute men each, and 2 groups of militia. So there were 4 altogether, and they purchased cannons for them to have. And they did other things as well, it might be mentioned later, but for people who couldn't afford a good gun, they voted to supply money so that those people could have be well armed. And they did other things to help the less fortunate. I'll take a look at that. Actually mentioned on this page. So Captain Samuel Ward, he was a delegate from Worcester County to the Correspondence Committee in Boston. Dunsmore, I don't have his first name, and Asa Whitcomb, they were delegates to the Provincial Congress, and the Provincial Congress met, I think 4 times. Sometimes when they met, they'd meet for like a month or a couple of weeks and really hash things out. And so that was pretty key to plans for the war. Lancaster was chosen to store war supplies. There were a lot of people in Boston lost their homes for various reasons. Usually the British did something, like deciding to take it over to live in. And we took in 103 residents and gave them a place to live. We also sent money into Boston to assist with things that were going on there with the colonists. There was a company of British prisoners and loyalists, 34 people. They came out here, and the Lancaster people stood sentry for them. Now we get to, these are the other side of the coin here. Jonas Wyman went into Boston, and he did his errands, picked up a few things, and he was on his way out. Now at that time, Boston was a peninsula. There was a narrow road that you had to cross. That was the only way out of Boston. So of course, the British soldiers would hang around there and harass people. And they harassed him. They detained him for several hours. They helped themselves to what he had in his cart. And he felt that was unfair, and that was all taken to court, and I'm not sure what the outcome was. Judge Levi Wilder, he clearly was a loyalist. He sided with Friends of the Court, but he died the summer of 75. So he hadn't had a chance to join in the revolution. But his son, after he died, his son ran off to England, so that says a lot there. The Willards, I was surprised that the 3 sons of Samuel Willard, so they were grandsons of Simon, they they all went to Halifax or to England. They didn't want to fight England. Now, the question comes up, why were people doing that? Well, some people thought we'd never win the war like this, and they felt they were British citizens, so they felt it really wasn't right. So there's, two sides to every question. As the Loyalists left, their estates were confiscated. But one of the Willards when they went to Halifax, they established a town called Lancaster. And after, whichever one it was, so it would have been Abel, it would have been Samuel. When the father died, the rest of the family came back, and they did get their house back, but that was an exception. In most cases, people did not. Now I've set the scene, so let's think about this. How did people get the news? They had to wait for the the people that delivered the mail to come out. Most people didn't know how to read. So the men would go and hang around in the tavern and hash out some of the issues of the day. Well, it wasn't always about the war. There were other things going on. And the most popular tavern was the Gates Tavern. But I'm not sure if it was actually a tavern by that date, because there wasn't a lot of business in the 1700s before the Revolution in Lancaster. They all kind of sprung up right after the Revolution. But there were places that people would go to have a drink, and frequently it was the home of a wealthy person who had enough space in their house, and the men would get together and talk. And I say the men because I think the women, we'll get into the issues with the women a little bit later, but they all had things to do in the home. Liberty poles became significant. Every town had one. If some big news came, somebody would climb the pole and put the hat up there so everyone would know wherever the gathering place was, they would go there and hear the news. And they did that for secret meetings as well. And of course, the British would come out and try to arrest people if they saw that the hat was on the pole. If you go to the Bedford pole capping, they still do that. It's kind of fun. So next question is, what were they talking about? Well, I have a slide for each of these things. So this is just kind of a summary. Inoculations. In 1721, over 60% of the population of Boston died from smallpox. And a big part of the reason was people refused to get vaccinated. Sound familiar? Lotteries, people were arguing about whether those should be legalized or not. They were made illegal because people were cheating. They were having lotteries and keeping the money instead of putting them toward whatever it was supposed to be. And Massachusetts made them legal, but for the government only, because that was the most popular way for the governments of the towns to raise money. So the right-hand column, political bias. Should newspapers be giving both sides of the story? Well, hey, we know that doesn't happen today even, and it didn't happen then. There were actually newspapers that were created just to push a certain issue, and they were owned by whoever was trying to push it. Using pseudonyms. Ben Franklin was one of the people who did that. And what it came down to was you needed to take responsibility for what you said, and people needed to be able to question you. So that became an issue. A selection of news can create bias. They didn't yet understand about having reporters. If you had news, you went to the newspaper place, and the one person in there who wrote all the articles, well, you told him about it. The distribution of paper was taxed, so not a lot of extra papers could be printed. So the town might have one, and it would be in wherever the gathering place was. Frequency of publication. There were a few that were weekly, but none more than that. And if something special came up, they put out a special issue. But there really weren't a lot of newspapers. I'm thinking Massachusetts had the most probably, and Pennsylvania. What else have I got on here that I need? Oh, so I looked into people that ended up being arrested. Not sure if everybody knows the story here. Isaiah Thomas. Governor Hutchinson wanted him prosecuted, and the grand jury couldn't find a reason. Isaiah Thomas ended up moving out of Boston and coming out to Worcester, and that was the beginning of the Antiquarian Society in Worcester, which is now world known for its collection. Another one that's interesting is James Franklin, was Ben Franklin's brother. He was put in jail there were two things that he did. He didn't like the way the pirates were treated when they were arrested, and the other thing was that he reported a scandal that involved the royals in England. And so the British went after him for that. But the newspaper kept going because Ben took it over, and he didn't hold back. He got in trouble as well. John Peter Zenger was the first person to be tried for libel. That was quite significant. And James Parker, here's another connection with today. He questioned the results of an election and was arrested for it. Now, if you were printing a newspaper, you couldn't print anything until the British had a chance to review it and edit it. So there wasn't much freedom there. So healthcare. Another topic that has come up a lot today, and I mentioned earlier, 60% of Boston got smallpox. Cotton Mather, Increase Mather's son. Increase Mather is famous for editing and publishing Mary Rowlandson's book, along with a Native American and he published the first Bible in Iroquois, in a Native American language. So Cotton Mather was an important guy. And he got together with Zabdiel Boylston, who was a doctor, but he wasn't university trained. On the other hand, there was only one doctor in Boston who had gone to medical school. So there were a lot of doctors out there that weren't university trained. So when we talk about the smallpox inoculation, the interesting thing is it had already been available for a couple of hundred years. Why wasn't America using it? And in the hospital, we have William Douglas, Boston's only university-trained doctor, and he was against it. And he hooked up with his minister, and Cotton Mather was a minister, I forgot to mention that. He hooked up with his minister, and they said that, that God wouldn't approve of this, and that was why you shouldn't do it. So there were a lot of arguments, but the way the inoculation came about in the beginning was women milking cows didn't get smallpox when other people did. And this goes back. And people on farms noticed that, and they all knew about it, and somebody tried taking serum from the cow and inoculating people with it, and sure enough, those people didn't get smallpox. There was also a case of somebody's slave knew about that, and that was how Cotton Mather found out. I believe it was him who found out about it through a slave. So that was pretty interesting. Now you're probably wondering about the picture. In the 1700s, people knew very little about medicine, and most of the reason was because it was against the law to do anything that would help you, like dissecting human bodies, that kind of thing, to be able to learn about anatomy. So what they were doing was, oh, there's something bad in you, let's drain it out. And they would pick whatever fluid to drain out. And this guy is getting bled. They also had emetics that would cleanse you. General Gates was appointed governor. This was significant because, wait a minute, he's military. What are they doing here? That's not right. And then we find out at the same time they appointed a governor in New York who wasn't military at all. He actually was a transvestite. So I don't know what people thought of transvestites then, but they were trying. They still appointed governors in all the colonies. Sentries guarding the city. I've talked about that. The port of Boston was closed. They weren't letting any ships in except British ships. Colonists could only buy British goods. And they were prevented from developing businesses to manufacture many goods, like cloth for clothing. They were expected to take the cast-offs that Britain was sending over and wear those. Colonists unnecessarily detained. The judicial system under England's control, we've heard about all of that. Religion, okay, so 55% of the churches were either congregational or Anglican. England wanted them all to be Anglican. So they set up seminaries, colleges, to teach people how to be ministers. That didn't really work out all that well for them, but that was, they thought, a way that they would have more Anglicans and they'd have better control over people if they were all one religion. The towns were required to have a church. You were required to belong to a church. Men were members. Women were not really members. So a woman could leave a church and join another one, but for a man to leave, he had to get the permission of the minister. And the minister's not going to say yes because it's a cut in the money that the church has in his pay and so forth. And that became a big issue, and the ministers around the area got pretty upset. And this was, I'm moving into the early 1800s with this. But this man's picture, George Whitefield, he came over here from England. He did 2 tours over here during the 18th century. And he was in support of the millennialism. He was saying that women were the problem in the Garden of Eden. It was all their fault. I'm trying to think what else he was saying. But the interesting thing about it, those were the 2 big items. The interesting thing about it is 10, 20,000 people would come to hear him. And what's with that? So I guess men were happy the way women were. And another piece of it is you couldn't, because of the sin in the Garden of Eden, you could not get to heaven, you could not get close to God without going through Jesus. You couldn't go directly. And that comes up in pockets all around, and a little later on we start seeing religious groups forming, like the New Life religion and the Shakers, that believed in that. So it was actually called the Great Awakening when George Whitefield was touring the colonies, and he didn't need a microphone. Believe me, everybody in the neighborhood could hear him. Yeah. Next thing, money. England was perfectly happy for us not to have paper money. They wanted us to send goods to them in payment, and they would send things to us and expect us to pay for them, but we didn't have any money. So we tried to set up some paper money, bills of credit, they were called in some cases. People tried counterfeiting British money. The penalties for that were severe, if you got caught by the British doing that. But our response to this lack of money is Henry Gardner was from Stowe, and he was part of the provincial government, and he volunteered to collect the money. So when the tax collectors came around, he sent people out to intercept them and steal the money. And that money was all put into a fund for our government rather than the British. Public education. Now, I hinted at this before with the higher education. And here we have 80% of graduates did not enter the ministry, even though that's what the British were hoping. And I mentioned about most colonists couldn't read before the Revolution, but very soon after the Revolution, so the early 1800s, just about everybody had learned how to read. So quite effective. I have a quote here from Ben Franklin: "Education is the best foundation for creating a stable government and informed citizenry. The good education of youth has been esteemed as the surest foundation of the happiness of private families and of commonwealths." So he believed that school was a place where you learned the things you needed to succeed as an adult, but also you learned about the government, how it was run, and how you could be involved, and how you could affect change if it was needed. William Livingston is 1739, so that's going back a bit, but he wrote the Watchtower series, and what he was trying to do was get Anglicans out of the colleges and have them be real colleges and have people be able to learn other things than just religion. Oh, and here's our favorite topic. Here I have listed all the things that were taxed. And they definitely got in the way of living your life. In some ways, so wine, distilled spirits, limes, lemons, oranges, which had to be imported. Sugar and molasses also were imported, but the colonists found substitutes, found ways to make sugar from beets, for instance. And there were other things they used as seasoning in the foods. We've got the Stamp Act, and that's probably the one that's talked about the most. And that put a tax on legal papers, newspapers, pamphlets, and, of course, preventing people from getting the news out. Townshend Act's duties on items imported by the colonists, including glass, lead, paints, paper, and tea. So glass, lead, and paints all have to do with building a house. And they were taxing windows, they were taxing glass. So when you're trying to put a house together, closets were taxed for a while as well. All these crazy things. There it is up there in green. We actually did something. The colonists decided to boycott all British goods. And that didn't make things easy for them. So yeah, what do we do about clothing if we can't buy it from England and we can't make cloth? What do we do? Well, they found a way, and they changed their style. They didn't dress the same as the Europeans. So the British tried to get the East India Company into selling things in the colonies, and to try and get more tariffs income. And they figured low-cost tea, that'll do it. If it's a lower price, people will buy it anyway. Well, that didn't happen. And the women actually staged a protest against tea. And there were cases of women experiencing withdrawal symptoms from drinking tea. You see the Port Act was the closure of Boston Harbor. So all these things of closing the port, closing the harbor, this was happening in Massachusetts, but not everywhere, not in all the colonies. They were picking on us. How dare they? And we've talked about these things already, but we have loyalists versus patriots, and you can see in a gathering setting, there were arguments on both sides, and people realized that they were British citizens, actually British subjects, a little bit different. Colonists wanted to be a different kind of citizen than England wanted them to be. And I think I've mentioned just about everything there already. Lotteries. Corruption of privately run contests, so they made them illegal in 1719. Fines, government-sanctioned lottery to raise money and to protect the coastline. I work for the trustees of reservations, so that's very near and dear to me. Maine was part of Massachusetts back then, and so that's quite a coastline. Doesn't Maine have the longest coastline, I believe? 1765, there had been 22 lotteries, but they were all government only. So what were they raising money for? Has anybody got any ideas what, I mean, they weren't necessarily raising them for the support of the war. So if we weren't building up to the revolution, it would have been in Lancaster, bridges and roads, because so many people were traveling through Lancaster, it made a lot of sense to have good roads. Here we go. So this is about Penelope Barker is the one who staged the protest against tea. But I want to just read this to you because the point of view on women was quite different than today. Most males thought that the very nature of females made them incapable of doing the work that society required of men. So they didn't want to set their women up for failure. And as women turn away from their duties at home, they're endangering society. Society would fall apart if women didn't hold it together in the home and get all the laundry done and the cooking and all that. Women caused humankind's fall in the Garden of Eden. I mentioned that with Whitefield. Women believed they needed to be freed from tyranny practiced by their husbands. Well, it all adds up to that for sure. So in 1770, at least 300 women in the Boston area promised to give up drinking tea. So they were coming out with a statement that was political, and They weren't allowed to discuss politics, so this was a very big deal. And in addition to not drinking tea, they were not going to wear anything that came from England. Really quickly, I have 3 slides in your handouts. This is one of them. I've listed reenactments that I've gone to or been involved in. Most of them I've been involved in. If you're interested in actually seeing battles reenacted, the Boston Massacre, you get to see the trial. It's great fun. There's probably more if you go to websites online. These are the resources that I used. I've given you a list of those as well if you wanted to read more about it. And the third slide in the handout is the map of Lancaster that shows where the old houses are, and it has a link so you can access the map online or on your phone, and you can click on the spots and it'll give you the address, and I'm working on putting more details and a picture of the house on the map as well, so when you click on it you'll see all that. So do we have any questions? Yes?
What was the difference between the Minutemen and the militia?
Oh, good question. So the militia were trained beyond what the Minutemen were. The Minutemen were like on call. Yeah, yes?
When you talked about loyalists leaving or being sort of pushed out of town and their homes or estates being
Confiscated.
who did the confiscating and how did they divide them up?
That's a really good question. So first, they interviewed all the people that were in question, and one of the people they interviewed was the minister. And he was able to convince them that he was on their side, that he was not a loyalist. But had he been, and the other people who were, they interviewed, so they talked it through with each one because they knew these people, these were their friends. But you have judges, justice of the peace, who are paid by the king. So they were obvious people that needed to be talked to. And if you said, yes, I am loyal to the king, they put you on a list and they hung it up in the town square. So everybody knew, okay? And so the first thing that would start happening is you'd go to the blacksmith and they'd say, sorry, I'm too busy today, and that kept happening to you, and it would drive you out of town. The confiscations, I think the town government took them and then sold them or gave them to the poorer people in town. We did have poor people then, more so than now, yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay.
A good topic would be the size of Lancaster as a function of time. The original land it was, and then this town became 1850, Clinton, and
yes, I think it was 9 towns altogether. Parts of 9 towns that.
And overlaying it with a current map that we see the original land that was Lancaster.
Yeah, I didn't have a map that showed that.
For another lecture.
Do that for another lecture. Yeah,
Not today,
yeah.
but
I'm thinking that was done. I'm not sure. Yeah, but that would be good. There's in the back there is a book, and it's available in the library about the Lancastrian towns. Yeah, but it was a huge land grant, and even now, 30% of the land in Lancaster we can't even go on because it's owned by the government. And I did another talk on the Shakers, and I had to get permission from the prison, and they gave me an escort. What happened? And they gave me an escort to go around to the landmarks of the Shakers. I don't know if any of you went to that one. It is on YouTube. If any of you don't know, SLCT has a page on YouTube, and they have many videos. Heather did quite a few, and there are other people as well that have done them. If you want to know, for instance, about the Thayer family, she did a series of 5 or 6. Yes,
Are any of these historical homes ever open to the public?
they're all private. They're all privately
And
owned.
nobody takes in, nobody accepts tourism.
You could ask, but I've never heard of asking. I know a few years back we set up a tour of Hawthorne Hill, but it was unoccupied at the time. Yeah, and there's a video of a tour of that on SLCT. Yeah.